So, good morning, everybody. I think we should start. We can start our I think it is for the first time that we have Digital Humanities days at the Higher School of Economics.
We had a week, but we never had days.
Only days. Well, pity that we have only days, not a whole week. And welcome to everyone, but first of all, of course, to our guests from the United Kingdom, from England, from Devonshire, from the University of Exeter. And the first point is that the High School of Economics has some sort of agreement of cooperation with the University of Exeter, and this makes many things easier. And the second point is that the University of Exeter has quite nice positions in many subjects in all possible rankings. We know also here in the country that rankings is a very important thing. And the third point is that the University of Exeter is well known because of its wonderful digital lab, and it's almost the first thing that we see on the website of the University of Exeter. The University of Exeter seems to be very proud of this digital lab, and you can see also the price or the sum of investment, and it's almost 1.5 million, and not of ruble, but of another money. And it's on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have rather small but rather ambitious Digital Humanities Center at the Higher School of Economics here at Moscow. And on the other hand, we have also a very important program at the Perm campus of the Higher School of Economics. The Higher School of Economics have several localities, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Nizhny Novgorod, and Perm. So we have also representatives of Perm campus here, who are very important, and special welcome to you. I think that the distance from Moscow to Perm is a bit smaller than the distance to Exeter, or the same. Maybe.
It's only 2 hours by plane.
2 hours, only 2 hours by plane. And also this was my autocratic decision to invite you here also. You know, many things here can be made only on autocratic basis, and this was my autocratic decision to try to bring you here, and I am very glad that we are successful in this point and you are here. And of course, I am very curious to know what can be done for 1.2 million pounds. What are the results? And my curiosity was the first point. And the second point was maybe you will make some acquaintance with our colleagues, and maybe the colleagues will present you also something of their own projects and maybe achievements, I don't know. And maybe there will be some sort of cooperation. You will launch, who knows, maybe. It's not obligatory, but maybe. So, and we're very glad to see you here. You are welcome, and I hope that you feel more or less comfortable at our university. And I hope that, as far as I know, we should start with the presentation of your Digital Humanities Lab. And that's correct. Please, I take the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. It's
Professor Clark.
Yes, I'm James Clark. I'm Professor of Medieval History at Exeter University. I'm also Dean for Research in Humanities, and so among my other responsibilities is the establishment and the funding of the Digital Humanities Lab. I do have some research connections with the activity there, but I also am the one who's left to worry about paying for all of it, which it has been a considerable investment, as you've heard, over recent years. And what we want to do over the next few minutes is just give you a taste of the Digital Humanities activity at Exeter. I should start, though, I think, by saying that it is an enormous pleasure to be here because we're very conscious that digital humanities is not simply a discipline, but it is indeed a community, and it is a global community. And our primary objective in expanding digital humanities activity at Exeter really is to ensure that we are fully networked across that global community and that we are able to establish close and collaborative relationships wherever good digital humanities scholarship is being practiced. Charlotte and I, in the last 12 months, have been visiting other digital humanities centres across the world. We have a good collaborative relationship with digital humanities at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. We have an early stage collaborative project with digital humanities specialists at Stanford in the US, and our range and network of relationships is expanding all the time, and we're very, very excited at the possibility of bringing HSE digital humanities into that network of relations that we have. I should start by saying then, what is the Digital Humanities Lab at Exeter? Digital humanities was practiced at Exeter, of course, over more than a decade before we established a dedicated facility, the Digital Humanities Lab. I don't know what the situation is like in Russia, but in the UK, increasingly it's difficult for humanities research to attract significant funding, and so we faced something of a challenge in securing more than £1 million to build a dedicated digital humanities lab, but we were very fortunate in securing funding to create an entirely new building, and that gave us the opportunity to establish spaces that were entirely purpose designed to meet our needs for a variety of digital humanities work. Our aim from the outset was not to create a laboratory that can do everything, and in which all forms of digital humanities specialism might be supported, but rather to focus our attention in particular areas of activity which built on strengths as they were already well established in the university. So we created within the laboratory dedicated space for 2 and 3D imaging, and for the safe and secure storage of archival material that would be the subject of that imaging. We also created a digital audio and video suite because a good deal of our work involves the creation of various different kinds of video and audio casts that are embedded into digital projects, and we needed a recording suite for that. We also were conscious of the need to have a presentation suite, somewhere where the mysterious work of digital humanities can be presented to our own colleagues and to wider audiences. And so perhaps our most conspicuous and certainly most expensive feature is a 9-screen video wall, which occupies a space at least probably 1.5 times greater than the area of that wall I'm facing here, which accounted for about a third of our total budget. I think once it was finally fitted, we'd spent about £350,000. But it is an enormous asset, and it means that many of the projects that we're going to show you in a moment can simply be experienced by colleagues, by students, by the wider public in a way that wouldn't be possible on a conventional laptop. So the lab is about both the productive activity of digitally enabled humanities research and also the presentation of the outputs of that research. What we're going to do over the next few minutes then is to just highlight to you a handful of projects that are currently supported in the lab, and we think they give a flavour of the kind of activity that goes on there. I should just say, I focused shamefully on the expensive infrastructure. I should say a little bit, I think, about the staffing. The Digital Humanities Lab has a core staff, both technical and research staff. We have 2 research fellows of whom Charlotte Upman is one here today. Each of our research fellows has their own area of specialism, but their role is also to support projects based in other disciplines that are employing digital methods. So research fellows will pursue their own research and then in parallel act as a project researcher on a variety of other projects supported in the lab. In addition, we are able to draw into the lab technical staff who are part of the university's own central IT resource. We have a research IT unit in the university, and some of those staff are affiliated to the Digital Humanities Lab, and they work with academics on their projects. So I have a project at the moment I'm going to tell you about in a moment, which is focused on medieval manuscripts, and I have a member of that technical staff supporting me in that work. In addition, we have 6 student internships based in the Digital Humanities Lab. Those internships typically run for a year, but it is possible for some students to extend that over 2 years. And that gives students the opportunity to gain hands-on experience of digitally enabled research that is going on in the lab. In fact, they also play a critical role. They are a further pair of hands, and it's certainly true that some of our projects would not have reached the advanced stage they have had we not the advantage of these student interns. For those interested in paying for all of this, the student interns are another aspect of the investment that we require from the university in order to expand our activity. Then we do have a wider community of scholars whose work is digitally enabled, shall we say, and some of whom are digital humanities practitioners themselves, who are affiliated to the lab. To date, we've made 2 academic appointments of scholars whose work is actively employing the methods of digital humanities. And Dr. Richard Ward, who's here today, is one of those members of staff. He's in the history department. Somebody that is known, I know, to a number of you around the table, Professor Leif Isaacson, is another appointment that we've made, and he is based in our Department of Ancient History and Classics. In the future, we are looking to make further appointments of humanities-based scholars who are themselves practitioners of digital humanities and who will then be affiliated to the lab. Finally, I suppose I should say we also have a expanding community of PhD students whose work is either firmly based in the lab or whose work brings them into the lab. Those who are working on the construction of a variety of databases, those who are working with GIS, those who are working in the 3D scanning of archaeological, particularly osteo material, also those who are working in the digitization and the creation of digital editions of medieval texts. So it's a core community that is relatively modest, but a wider surrounding community that is really quite significant. So let's move on to a handful of projects. Charlotte's going to introduce a couple of projects that she is directly involved in and supporting, and I'm going to talk to you about some medieval and early modern projects that are based in the lab. So over to Charlotte.
Thanks very much, James. My personal interest is based firmly in ancient history, which is great fun for a digital humanities specialist. But I've been working on a couple of projects which are outside my own particular area of interest, but which, as James mentioned, I'm supporting as part of the research fellow role. One of the things I've been very involved in is text encoding with the TEI, and I'm involved in something called Epidoc, which I'm going to talk to you about later on. But I'm going to talk about 2 general TEI-based projects now. The first one then is the Famine and Dearth database. This is an early modern project whose principal investigator is Aisha Mukherjee, who's based in the English department at Exeter. And this was a project which was looking at situations of famine in both India and Britain, drawing on a very, very wide selection of sources. The database consists of, I think it's 723, I seem to remember, texts, which are as wide-ranging as plays, poetry, official documents, travel writings, gazetteers, and various other types of sources. Now, this started off very much as a text encoding collaboration between the University of Exeter and the University of Jadavpur in India. And we have teams in both locations who've been working on the text encoding parts of the project. We discovered a lot about how to work successfully with very sort of geographically far-ranging teams as part of this project. And we're hoping that we can extend this into the future and pursue that relationship as well. So I shall have to move around here to actually show you what's going on. As I say, this began very much as a, I suppose you might say, a relatively straightforward text encoding project in terms of the fact that we were going to use TEI with an exist database. Are you familiar with ExistDB? Yeah. Yes. But it sort of expanded as we went. As with all projects like this, you discover as you're going through the source material that there are many things that you hadn't thought of, and you need to change the project a little bit as you go along. So let's just take an example. So this is perhaps what you might expect. We have some information about each of the texts. We have a transcription. We also provide translations. And we have, again, the usual sort of things like keywords. So you can explore the database as a digital edition of each of the texts. And there are sort of explanatory essays about their significance and what they tell us about the situations of famine in the early modern period. But we began to think as we went through the project about how we might map some of this as well. This wasn't part of the original plan, it's something that kind of grew out of our investigations during the project. And we chose to begin with the journey of a man called Peter Mundy. Okay, so this doesn't work so well on the screen, but I'll try to expand things. Okay. Peter Mundy was the son of a Cornish fish merchant who travelled to India in the 1630s. And this was a pretty unusual thing to do at the time for someone from Cornwall, which is in the southwest of England. And he wrote a very, very vivid diary, an explanation of what he found as he moved through his journey from Surat to Agra. And we began by encoding the text in TEI, and then we started noticing that there were some areas where he was describing situations where he found people who were dying in the streets, people who were starving, lots of thieves and robbers on his journey. And then there were other areas where he was surprised to find that in fact there was plenty of food, at least for some people. And so we thought perhaps it might be worth mapping his journey and giving the reader the opportunity to see both the diary entry and to get a general sense of the areas where he was finding problems and the areas where he was finding that all was well. And so we have a timeline. Perhaps if I do this, we can see a little better. Okay. So you can move through his journey and bring up his diary entry for each place, or you can click directly on the place that you're interested in if you happen to know. Now, we experimented with doing some natural language processing as part of this. And we ran into a few problems with early modern spelling, some of you may have come across when trying to do natural language processing. We wanted to pick out particular terms that were of interest to people who were studying the situations of famine in India And we ended up, in fact, encoding this by hand. Okay? So we tried the NLP approach and then decided in the end that, given that this was just for one text, we were going to encode these terms by hand. So if you highlight certain terms that you're interested in, it will just give you the places on the map that relate to those terms, and then on the left-hand side you can just about see that those terms are highlighted in the various colours within the text itself. What we're hoping to do with this is also to include some overlays so that you can explore the terrain from different periods and see how it relates to the modern day. And the plan for this really is to use this as the basis for a much wider study of travel writings within India during the early modern period. So as I say, this was based on our TEI and EXIST work. Now, that's something that we're trying to turn into a bit of a platform that allows us then to build other projects on that. So we want to focus on specific technologies which we can use for a number of different projects. So we start off with the same basis. And coincidentally, we have another project to do with famine. This was not intentional, it was a completely separate project. This is the poetry of the Lancashire cotton famine in the 19th century. A lot of people haven't heard of the Lancashire cotton famine, even people who live in Lancashire. So this is something that Simon Rennie, again who's based in the English department, was particularly interested in investigating. Essentially what happened was that the American Civil War caused a break in the supply for the materials that were needed for the mills in Lancashire. There was the main, basically cotton production was one of the main industries in Lancashire during the late 19th century. And what this project is examining is the poetic response to the cotton famine that arose during that period in local newspapers. There were many hundreds, in fact thousands of texts that were published in newspapers in the Lancashire area, often written by the workers in the mills. And this is a subject that hasn't really been studied before. So, again, based on our EXIST and TEI, we have a database of the first 100 in this case, cotton famine poems which have been collected. This is a soft launch. We're going to expand this to several thousand texts ultimately. So this is a current project. So this is really a sort of a preview of what we'll have. We're allowing people to search via people. So we have a lot of fictional people. We had a few interesting discussions about how Father Christmas should be classified. We're particularly concerned about that because there are children who are involved in this project, and then some local schools in Lancashire are collecting some of the poetry, and they're making contributions to the project, and that's part of their school syllabus as well. So it's been quite successful on that front. So for each person, you can see which poems it's associated with, and then we have the poem. We have also a recording of each of the poems, which is quite key to this because a lot of the poems are actually in Lancashire dialect, and as it happens, the three people who are working as the PI, the principal investigator, co-investigator, and the researcher are all from Lancashire, and they decided that they would actually read the poems in the dialect words, and I think that's worked very well. It's really helped to get the public involved and interested in the project. This project has a very, very strong sort of public engagement aspect. There's also a band, a folk band, which is apparently quite well known, called Faustus, who've recorded new songs, in fact an entire album, based on the Cotton Famine poetry, which has been investigated as part of this project. So that's been quite another quite interesting aspect of the project. We're working at the moment on an advanced search, so sadly I can't preview that for you, but if we have a look at the keywords, you can see some of the main themes that are coming out at the moment. Obviously, we'll be happy to talk in more detail about any of the projects that we're showing you at the end of the presentation, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavour of what we're doing. So these are some of the dialect poems. I don't know how easy they're pretty difficult for most people in the UK to understand. If you're not from Lancashire, it's really hard to understand it, so you have to have do we have volume? Can I play one?
Huh?
Do we have volume? So are there any speakers? Can I play?
Well, we can bring some, but it will take like a couple of minutes.
No, that's fine. I just wondered whether I could play a video, but I think we'll play it at the end. That's fine. I'll definitely play you one at the end. Okay. Do you want to?
Should we move on? Yeah.
Okay. So just to round that off, those are two projects of many which use the TEI and exist at Exeter, but these are two that we thought would be useful to focus on. Now we're going to move on to another very highly sort of public engagement focused project, which James is going to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. There are really two parallel streams of activity in the Digital Humanities Lab at Exeter. One is very much driven by scholarship and research questions generated by specialists in different humanities departments, such as the two that you've been hearing about, which are driven by specialists in English literature, and we have others in history, classics, ancient history, and so on. The second stream of activity passing through the Digital Humanities Lab, however, is much more driven by questions and challenges that external organisations bring to us. We are in a region of the United Kingdom which is renowned for its historic heritage. Many ancient buildings, ancient sites that are visited by tourists are in the southwest of England. The southwest of England contributes more, I understand, to the tourist economy internally within the United Kingdom, within England, than any other region of the country. Those organisations increasingly are seeking us out and asking for our assistance in using both humanities knowledge and digital humanities methods in order to discover new ways of interpreting their heritage assets, their historic buildings, their archives and libraries and books and other artefacts for wider audiences, for their visitors. These are historic sites that are looking to engage visitors, a wide variety of both British tourists and tourists from overseas, and they recognise that in a digital humanities lab, in a way, they have a unique combination of humanities subject knowledge and digital humanities methods that might enable them to find new and more exciting ways for visitors to experience these places. So since the opening of the Digital Humanities Lab in 2017, we have built up a variety of relationships with these external organisations, and we are working at their commission, really, on projects to apply our knowledge and our methods to find new ways of visitors experiencing their sites. One of these is Powderham Castle, which is the home of the Earl of Devon. The Earl of Devon is an ancient title, an ancient lordship. The Earl in the Middle Ages held all of the territory, more or less, in Devon, much of it in Cornwall. So that is he was the most significant landowner, the most significant proprietor in the whole of the southwest region of the medieval Kingdom of England. In fact, the medieval Earls of Devon were more than that, because they were also connected by marriage and blood to the successive royal families of England from the time of the Norman Conquest at the end of the 11th century through to the 16th century. In the 16th century, the Earl of Devon was, for a time, the closest advisor of the Tudor king Henry VIII. So this is an earldom that has been intimately connected with English history from the 11th century to the 16th century. Remarkably, the same family remains in the earldom and remains in the family home, the castle, just outside the city of Exeter. The castle and their collections, their artefacts, are a major tourist attraction in the southwest region, and they came to us with this proposition that we have both historical knowledge of medieval and early modern England, we also have digital methods and a digital lab. Can we help them to find new ways of interpreting their castle and its collections for visitors? So what we did was to visit and look at their archives. And we identified this wonderful manuscript, richly illuminated, which is a cartulary, so a collection of charters, but it also is a family history. It contains a series of very early genealogical accounts of the descent of this remarkable family from the time that it arrived in England with William, Duke of Normandy, in 1066, all the way through successive centuries of medieval achievement as this single family, this single earldom, moves towards a position of preeminence in England. We decided that we should make this single manuscript the focus of our first effort to help them interpret the castle. We began by creating a digital copy of the manuscript, but then we thought that the genealogical tree was simply too rich a resource not to go further with, because there's a limit in a castle which has many visitors coming to it, guided tours being taken around the rooms of it. There's a limit to how effective a single two-dimensional digital image can be for those visitors. So we wanted to do something a little bit more with it. And so what we did was to take... can we bring up the medieval one? Right, so we took, this is going to be difficult to see on the screen, but we took the individual leaves of this genealogical tree of this remarkable family, and you can see it here. This is for those of you who are familiar with medieval texts, it's actually very unusual for a genealogy of any family that is not royal to be compiled at this early date. This was written and painted around about 1400. And there simply aren't, certainly in an English context, other examples of a non-royal genealogy compiled at this early date. So it was simply too important not to do something with. But it exists in a closely bound codex on successive leaves of that codex, which makes it very difficult to view. So we took the digital images and did what, in effect, perhaps has never been done even by its creator, which was to actually turn it properly into a tree by stitching together the digital images using a piece of software called Sea Dragon, I believe. Is that?
So Sea Dragon is the viewer.
Oh, right. Yeah. And in fact, we took this from a piece of work that had been done actually for something much less scholarly. It had been used previously for mapping a Game of Thrones text on a fan site. but we decided that this was a much worthier application from the pseudo-Middle Ages to the real Middle Ages. So we took the individual leaves and we stitched them together, and we can then explore the family tree. And what we did for members of the public who are visiting this place, give them some interpretation, but of a limited kind. And so as they work their way down the family tree, we draw out points of detail that may be of interest to them. So this is mounted at the castle on a large touch screen. So visitors can then explore the family tree. They can move around, even if they're not, and of course, the vast majority of visitors will not have any capacity to read the medieval text or even to interpret the letters. But nonetheless, they can begin to navigate this family tree and understand at the very least the kind of information that it contains. There's a great deal of information about where this family lived across medieval England, and so we bring out details of these buildings, some of which can still be visited. So the map becomes not just a way of the family tree becomes not just a way of mapping the family, but also a way of mapping the region. It's a point of entry into the region itself. We also took the opportunity with our high-resolution images to try and engage their interest a little bit in the manufacture of this manuscript, so bringing out points of detail there. Once we'd digitized that manuscript, we then found this rather extraordinary object as well. And this was a challenge really presented to us by the Earl of Devon, that it was one thing to use our digital methods on a very small codex, but could we tackle a parchment roll that measures about 5 meters in length, and it's about 2 meters across? And we accepted the challenge, but we simply had no understanding technically of how we could digitize this in any satisfactory way. In the end, one of our technical staff constructed a rig for mounting the camera. The rig was, he's reconstructed it recently, hasn't he? Because the first prototype was not hugely reliable. And having been there at the castle when we were taking the images, it was a little shaky. But there was no other way except with a rig to be able to take images across the roll. And of course, as you'll appreciate, we needed to be precisely positioned each time. We worked out a grid. I think in the end it's about 300 images. Now, this is a genealogical roll that is the best part of 400 years old. It was made in the early 17th century. It doesn't press flat on any surface, unfortunately, which presented further problems in terms of digitization, simply because we were often losing elements of script, elements of decoration as well. One further practical challenge in digitizing such an object was the fact an object of such length could only be laid out in certain spaces. Of course, if you're the owner of a castle, you have plenty of space. And so this was laid out in the servants' hall on a long refectory table. But of course, if you're the owner of a castle, you also have non-conventional windows. So large arched lancet windows are not great when it comes to controlling light for high-resolution digital imaging. And so after a very lengthy day, when the sun was shining as brightly as it is today, we discovered that in fact the 300 images we'd taken on the rig had to be abandoned entirely because of the sun marks across them, so that we had to do the entire process of imaging again a second time. But the results are very good. And this really is where this relationship with an external organisation like this has proved really very useful for our own research, because we now know how we can digitise non-standard documents, non-standard archival artefacts of this kind. So again, we stitched back together those 300 images, which was no mean feat in itself, and we created a role that can be explored on a touch screen. And so rather than visitors being faced with something that they simply can't interpret, many of these details and dates and figures and coats of arms mean little to the average visitor, but then we begin to explain them to them. And what we find is that visitors return to the touch screen again and again, having visited different spaces in the castle, to understand a little more of its history. Yeah, I should say that because the version you're looking at is the version that is mounted on the touch screen, it's not suited to a laptop screen. So that should simply incentivise you to get on a plane and come to Devon and see it in all of its glory on the touch screen. Okay, so that's one project where we've worked with an external organisation and really taken a challenge from them that we've had to employ our own research knowledge and digital humanities methods to resolve. The second is Hidden Florence. With this project, we're working with another tourist organisation, but of an international kind. We're actually working with the City of Florence tourist office. Their challenge was to bring specialist architectural, historical and art historical knowledge more directly into the information that they provide tourists visiting the City of Florence. What our colleague, Professor Fabrizio Nevola, who is Professor of History of Art at Exeter, developed was a locative app which allows the visitor, as they walk around the central streets of Florence, to understand what buildings and other spaces, open spaces especially, they are standing in and looking at, how they would have been at a given point in Florence's Renaissance history. And so they are able to use the app to draw down wherever they stand within the central city area, draw down historical information and visual information using the app to understand what it is they're looking at, whether it's a public square, whether it's a church, whether it's a merchant's house. It's been hugely successful. We've seen very, very high numbers of downloads from visitors who've arrived in Florence. We also promote it via Twitter and via our own website, and so people are actually now using it not only as a tourism tool, which is interesting. It's sort of developed from being something that you might access when you visit Florence into being something that is now also being used in the classroom. So we're aware of several universities, particularly in North America, that are now using the app as a way of simply teaching Renaissance Florence, which is fantastic. And an application of the app, in fact, that we'd not originally envisaged. On the strength of that wider reach of the app, we have just this year, in 2019, entered into a partnership with the Gessi Foundation, who have provided us with about $250,000 to prepare really version 2.0 of the app, which is actually selectively going to allow the user to enter a number of the most significant buildings in the centre of Florence and see 3D full colour reconstructions of their interiors. As yet, we are selecting only 2 churches and 1 merchant's house, simply because of the sheer scale of the work involved. But the beauty of this project is that it is scalable, and as long as there is funding for our developers, for the moment we have funding for 2 years, and we think that we are only going to be able to complete 3 interiors in that time. But in due course, we expect to add further interiors to the app, and so the visitor will not simply understand Renaissance Florence in outline, but also from the inside, which is hugely exciting. App development, we hope to be an aspect of digital humanities practice, which will become a specialism of the Exeter Lab. And Hidden Florence, in that sense, is one of our sort of flagship projects. We are piloting the employment of the necessary developer expertise in order to expand in this area. With the success of Hidden Florence, we hope that there will be other app-based projects to follow. Our collaboration with Stanford aims to establish an app to explore another medieval manuscript, the 10th century Exeter Book of Old English Poetry, which was recently designated by UNESCO a World Heritage Object. And the expectation is that we might draw on some of our experience from Hidden Florence to have an app that explores not the inside of a medieval interior, but the inside of a medieval book. So this is very much work in progress, but already version 1.0 is available to you, and if you are heading in the direction of Florence in the summer months, then please access Hidden Florence, and more especially then join the Twitter discussion of the strengths and weaknesses of version 1.0, because of course it's through that community that we enhance and extend and expand the quality of what we're developing. So those are 4 projects currently live in Exeter Digital Humanities Lab, and we hope they give you a taste of the methods we use and the exchange, the creative exchange between humanities research, humanities scholarship, and digital humanities practice. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We have a couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks also for me. It's really fascinating and inspiring to see all this wide range of projects. I have a question about the maintenance of all these projects, because I think also in the future you will have more and more projects, and it's about maintenance. So do you have a technology stack, especially if you use common technologies like, for example, the Access database, a technology stack that makes it easier to maintain, also from a data center perspective maybe? Or do you always have to reinvent the wheel for all the projects, because at the end they are all different?
We're absolutely trying to get to a point where we don't have to reinvent any wheels. I'd say this is a work in progress. We've already established certain technologies as standard technologies for the lab, or standard languages, for instance, standard approaches. So we're using Django databases, we're using Exist databases for TEI. We're trying to get to a place where we can support legacy projects and current projects, but obviously there are some that were built on things like the Zend framework, which we no longer support. So if there are new phases for those projects, we would obviously have to move them into Django, for instance. So yeah, the answer would be we are on our way to doing that. I think this is a problem for any digital humanities lab, absolutely. If you talk to any of the ones that we've been in touch with, they've all had the same issues. How you deal with the legacy projects. I think the only real answer to that is really very good archiving of the data that the project is using, separately from the front end, because otherwise you run into all sorts of problems in future in terms of being able to access those projects.
Thank you.
But,
Well, I was just going to add, we found it such a problem in our network of universities that we have a relationship with. Actually, currently, we're managing a request from a university in Germany to take on some of their legacy projects because they feel that we have more of the infrastructure to support them than they do. We have made a commitment that we will support projects for up to 5 years after their completion. But as with taking this project on from Germany, ultimately it comes down to further investment from the university in order to be able to do it. So it's a big money problem.
Which university, if I may ask?
That's Trier.
Yeah, okay.
It's probably worth saying that we're having conversations with Open Research Exeter, which is our institutional repository, about questions like this as well. And I think those conversations will be fruitful.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, like really fascinating projects. And I have a lot of questions about projects, but I think I'm gonna postpone them for like further discussions. And for now, I'm interested in like student involvement, because that's what like concerns me and many more people here personally. Like you mentioned, you have some student positions there. So the question is, what are their roles? What are their tasks that you give them? Are they only humanities students, or do you have like also students with coding skills? And is it easy or is it hard to involve students from like other faculties who might have coding skills, but it might be hard to interest them in like your stuff? So yeah, could you elaborate?
Yeah.
In terms of the tasks that we give the students to do, they are involved in several things. Firstly, they're involved in the day-to-day running of the lab. So they're involved in the front desk and hiring out equipment, this kind of thing. So they get experience of the kind of the practicalities of the lab. They set up the seminar rooms for different events. They get involved with helping out with events. They do some administrative tasks. Then they have a series of sort of skills learning sessions. They get fully trained in how to use the 2D and 3D equipment in the lab, and the audio-video lab as well. They take that and then use it to support members of staff who are using the labs. So, for instance, they might get a week's worth of training in how to use the 3D technologies, and then they would then be able to support live projects and people who are coming in to do 3D work. So that's another aspect. They get involved with supporting what's going on in the seminar room as well. So they do support for the video wall. It's a really relatively complex thing to support, but they're very much support based. But we're trying to make sure that they develop the digital skills that will then allow them to go on to do other things. So, for instance, they're all able to participate in things like our text encoding workshops or GIS workshops. I certainly have had the sense so far that they've all felt that it was a good sort of learning opportunity, as well as obviously a paid internship.
And they're mostly from humanities, aren't they?
Yes, so because of that, and they are in fact all from humanities. All of our interns are from humanities, but we're talking closely with people from computer science and other areas within the university, outside of our college, who do want to get involved with digital humanities, and we obviously want to get involved with what they do. So there's a group who met quite recently who are interested in artificial intelligence and where our approaches can sort of intersect and help each other.
I think, to answer your question, I don't think it is difficult in principle to interest students, say in computer science, in what we do, because I've always been struck that they may be specialising in computer science, but the opportunity to spend time helping us with 3D imaging of a medieval skull or capturing an illuminated manuscript is something that they can still find interesting simply because it's not something they've done before. I think the main obstacle we find, and this may be true for you too, is more of a practical one, which is that in fact, in a very large university, our constituencies don't come across each other very often. And it's difficult for students in the sciences to discover humanities, in effect. We are an entirely different part of the campus, and they could spend 4 years at Exeter and simply never discover what was going on in the humanities. And the same is true for humanities students and computer science. So the inevitable practical difficulties of actually facilitating cross-disciplinary exchanges are our biggest threat, I would say.
We're trying to do that through events. So we're thinking of holding something like a coding workshop, you know, which gets together students from both computer science and
that's what we're also trying to do here.
Yes.
So that's why I'm asking, basically.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any questions more, but I think it's the best time to have our tea pause. But maybe I should put one question more, not to discuss it just now, but later on, after we will have our tea. You have presented, demonstrated wonderful projects, but most of them, or maybe all of them, have to deal with presentation of the knowledge, not of creating new knowledge. Not so many analytical expertise to need to make such wonderful things. And what is for me very interesting, what I'm curious to know, of course, what can the methods of digital humanities do to create new knowledge? Some sort of sophisticated analytical work, if you have also such examples. But we do not have to discuss this just now. Just now, I think we should have a cup of tea.
Okay.
Sure.
Но это же через после того, что как Даниил смотрит вещи.
Да.
В каком порядке?
Мы можем сдвинуть, я не знаю, мы можем сдвинуть свою презентацию, потому что, видимо, все-таки люди хотят чая, да. Презентация у нас все-таки, у нас есть презентация от Аси, я ее буду рассказывать, но она все-таки достаточно уже нормальная такая по размеру оказалась.
Ну давайте мы тогда со временем определимся, во сколько у нас. После чая начнем.
Давайте сделаем 10 минут чая, чтобы все отдохнули и немножко неформально познакомились. Потом сделаем, а потом начнем ту секцию чуть позже. У нас, в принципе, у нас нет каких-то больших сложностей с этим, у нас все свои.
Нет, мы пока мы остаемся до обеда, мы остаемся
Мы можем в
здесь.
соседнюю перейти.
Не надо.
Мы пьем чай здесь, да? So, guys, feel free to have tea, coffee, whatever, and like discuss things informally. And next we'll have a short presentation of our own center here, and then we'll move on to like presentations of specific projects.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the program, but it's going to be, I mean, it's shifting a bit further now.
I think you are more or less responsible for analytics.
So this is where we are now, this is our spot basically, and it's written like your level, our level, so, and then probably we're having a break now because it's like, then we're having our presentation, and then we'll have
Hello. Sorry to see you again. Yes, well, it's a very sweet and was visiting with us only just over a month ago.
It stimulates, of course, our imagination. It stimulates to show us.
Yeah, it's great, and the weather is fantastic. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was like
Something
no, I wasn't
other
expecting.
things that are awaited.
you're welcome to
Thank you.
coffee.
Yes, coffee would be good.
Yes. Or like disaster dedicated.
Because all these colleges,
It's kind of something like communal like art therapy, which is like it's a real thing. Like people have like suffers from like major thing like genocide or something, and then they write about it. It's kind of and I would understand why why people would want to add such like such a corpus of like disaster art. Something that's and emerge in several places.
Sort of conflicts between Andrew and Natalia Rostova, they had some sort of relations without seeing these just on the wall.
Нет, мы завтра, мы сейчас наберем
And also
and unlike many other projects, it's also like as like giving some sort of in some sense like having many countries and many things go out of like
describe all possible forms of space.
They find us generally.
This was, in my eyes, very good.
So with they knew
developers.
So they knew that both medieval history and medieval manuscripts still in Ireland. And so they came to us, not knowing any of us personally, but knowing the specialists. And that was the relationship grew from there. With Florence, because our colleague conducted research there over a number of years. He had, and is Italian himself, he had come to know people in Florence too. And so the personal relationship was there. So what we are in the process of doing, however, is launching a consultancy platform. So what we feel is that whilst these relationships generally arise from some prior knowledge, it is possible that these organisations simply, if they knew on the web that we have these specialists who can offer these services, they may well. And in fact,
people usually when you go to like when you're not like in Moscow and you're like
other organisations have come to us
studying history at school, usually some very centralized,
which is great. And of course,
and there is very few local stuff in the curriculum at all. If you're studying history or literature or whatever, it's basically like a unified program for everybody. Like the Grand Duchy of Moscow involved history, but you don't really get like a lot of local stuff. So anything of that sort is to. I would understand the appeal from the like schoolboys.
These organisations pay us to do and it's rare in the humanities to be able to.
Well, I'm a specialist in natural language processing. Essentially, just when you mentioned that you tried it and it didn't work, I mean, that usually happens when you try in like difficult domains of but I kind of shifted most recent recommendations, like last couple of years, like digital literacy and digital quality. I'm going to give a presentation so you can see some of our projects here. So we have a big project on network analysis of drama. Something like that. I'm going to think like a few words about it, but Frank Fisher is going to give us slide presentation. So you want to hear about local projects? I mean, we have more, currently we have more tendency to digital literacy studies rather than digital history stuff, but I think our aim wants to develop this side of this side.
Yes, I mean, as I said, we see this as two parallel roads we go down. Of course, there is the pure research, but pragmatically, given the financial imperatives of the university, we don't do as well. Then the money won't be there to do it. And in fact, I think there is an intellectual exchange between the two. Because in fact, although some of the work doesn't really anything other than deals with historical knowledge and but sometimes there's a discovery, sometimes there's something new. The same is true in Florence, particularly now, actually, reconstructing some materials.
Yeah, I mean, last year was like 800.
Also, a matter of public interpretation, but it's also research.
Actually, like, I mean, that's what we don't know. Like really it's hard to talk to them.
So it's not, they're not
it's really hard to find interaction.
But I think, yes, his question, what we currently don't have any colleagues, I think, really are those sort of projects which are using digital methods to analyze textual material. So we don't have people taking a digital text of Tolstoy and analysing it to establish aspects of style or language and so on. But that's simply because we don't have people with those research interests. I think Catherine is working
more on that tomorrow. Actually,
on something a bit more
like
on
three more
Soviet
presentations on
poetry.
our side by colleagues who are also going to talk about different projects to like digital theology, digital literature studies, digital study of historical literature.
Not so much.
Right. Yeah, no, Catherine's got this interesting project.
And today, I think,
And the reason that we don't present projects like that, to be honest, is that they're not very visual.
two of them,
To see. But she has created digital texts of anonymous Soviet poetry, and I think her main research question is to use digital methods to establish bodies of work.
go and connect.
So once all of the texts are digitally available, it's possible stylistically to identify clusters of groups that would appear to be quite similar. So that is the kind of analytical research I think that he has in mind. And that is in her field. I can see that is advancing in terms of aspects of poetry. But she's really the only one working on textual analysis in the field. We'd be glad if we had more. The difficulty, as always, is that because we can't always recruit new staff, we can only support projects that reflect the interest of the people who put those towards. So, well, it'd be interesting to hear about the projects, but do you have more of that sort of textual analysis going on? Right.
By the way, the humanities researcher, PhD student in Sweden, working on the financial system, Russian financial system in the
Actually, that was my question to you. How strict? You know, economic history.
Oh, absolutely. No, economic history is
I don't know about Exeter, most of the I know it's part of economics rather than...
Oh really? No. Originally, actually, Exeter had its own part of economic history. We don't now. But economic history is very much part of the history. And in fact, we have much less to do with economics. I think economic historians gravitate to economics. They don't really face it. So no,
definitely. Очень много всего параллельно происходит, к сожалению. Например, хакатон, вот там висит объявление, да, и в школе лингвистики тоже происходят всякие.
Very much see the humanities. Because the questions that they're using.
Нет презентации, которую я расскажу. Там есть как бы, но она длинная и лучше.
Actually,
А вы хотите уже начинать сейчас? Чтобы сейчас как-то призвал к... Можно просто в смысле
Ну, кофе же не важен не как кофе, добрый день, а как общение. Общение, оно тоже... Ну, здесь, наверное, Даниил должен уже быть, делать свои руки.
Okay, guys, you can keep drinking coffee and eating cookies, but you can do it just looking here and turning half ear to here, because I'm going to present the local DH center and like the DH activity in Russia as a whole. So if you don't mind, we'll start because we have to do it. So this presentation is actually prepared by Anastasia Boncha-Smolovskaya, who is one of the pioneers of digital humanities in Russia, and certainly the pioneer of digital humanities in Moscow. And she's prepared this presentation. Sadly, she's not with us today. So, as you can see, I mean, the title is Anastasia Boncha-Smolovskaya, but you can clearly tell that I'm not her. I'm just a little house elf of the DH Center, who is going to talk instead of her, like in her place. But, well, for all means and purposes, you can just consider me like an artificial intelligence application who's been trained on Isa's presentation and now reproduces it to you. This is the picture of our center, because we thought we're going to present down there. So this should have given you the idea that it's a nice and cozy place where people gather and collaborate and communicate, and it's like much more informal than the rest of the, on average, than the rest of the faculty. I guess you can now see it in person, so it's even better. And DH Center is a pretty new thing. It's emerged like basically a couple of years ago, and as you might guess from this map, there isn't many DH centers here in Russia. And the first one was probably in Krasnoyarsk, which is like literally the center, because it's the center of Russia. So it's like a good place, a fitting place to have a DH center, to have the first DH center. And in 2017, they held a really big, like probably the biggest so far DH conference in Russia, which featured even Ada, which featured all the like big people from like global DH community, like Melissa Teres, like there was Lev Manovich there. There were a lot of people, and it was a big event. With a great publicity and great scope. So this one was one of the signs that DH in Russia is basically alive and kicking now. And now we have a center here in Moscow. Why did we actually decide that we need a center? Well, first of all, to raise awareness, because just like you mentioned in your presentation, there are people who were, I mean, you said that there were people in Exeter who were doing DH basically before there was a DH organization. I mean, that's a typical case. In Russia, there have been people doing DH from like since 30s, I would say, with the pen and pencil. And here in Vyshka, there were also people who were doing different kinds of like digital approaches to literature, to culture, to all like humanities stuff long before DH. But they were like all alone, and they rarely ever knew about each other. Like that's what happens when universities grow big, as you already said. So the main point was to create a hub rather than an institution. So it's not an institution. We don't have we don't have a hierarchy. We don't have like directors and vice presidents and something like that. We only have people, and we connect people, and we enhance projects, and we organize conferences. And we first started by organizing like local events here. So you can see one of our talks here. People come here from all other institutions who are applying digital tools to different cultural matters, to different objects of study in the humanities, and they come here and they talk and they find audience, and it's really become a thing that has a huge demand here, because people do stuff but they don't really have audience. And on every conference where they go, they feel like marginals, basically, where they feel outsiders. So the main function first was to raise awareness and to allow people to create a common ground, basically, for projects, for interdisciplinary projects. And I think we are starting to manage that, because from these local events, we're eventually growing into larger conferences. And last February, we had a big conference here. It was called DH Meetup. It was basically a local DH Meetup within the university, but it already brought a lot of people. We had parallel sections. We had people from different parts of university, from different campuses, from different cities, basically, because we have a Perm campus, we have a St. Petersburg campus, and it was really a big event. And we found out that there are even us who are doing like digital humanities activity for 2 years at that point, and some of us like for 4 years, like Asa Bonchasmalovskaya, who first went to DH conference in 2014. Even us found out many more projects than we knew of, basically. And it was a big and pleasant surprise, because we found digital philosophers, we found digital folklore studies from the School of Philology who were interested in digital tools, in digital methods, who were applying network analysis to history, to literature. I mean, we are applying to literature, and we found out that we are not the only ones who are using this method. And this is really a method-based cooperation, and I think that's what digital humanities is mainly about. It's more about like us having common methods and exchanging experiences on the basis of this. And now we're trying to reach out to even wider audience. And last March, we actually headlined basically the conference at Yandex, which is like the hugest Russian IT company. It's basically Russian Google. So it was a big event with big coverage, with like media coverage, with translations on YouTube. And it really like sparked waves in different directions. And I'm still getting like feedback from strangers on social networks who tell that they saw our presentations and now they're interested, including programmers, including software engineers who were the main audience of this event. So what we are doing now is, like large part of what we are doing now is basically increase awareness that there are digital humanities and that you can approach old things, all this old stuff, old objects of study that we've been dealing with for like hundreds of years with new methods, and this can actually give us new insights. Yeah, and this is the members of our center and like associated people. Some of them you can see here at this Yandex event, and you can like get the idea of how large the crowd was. This is actually me there standing and giving a talk on like data and the humanities. We are also doing stuff for younger audience, for students, trying to get them involved. We are doing hackathons. These are the pictures from this very room, from the hackathon dedicated to statistical analysis in R, held by our colleague from psychology department. He is like a psychophysiologist and he is an expert in R. So he came here to teach philologists and linguists and people from other departments to teach them the basics of statistical analysis using R. And this is the poster for the upcoming hackathon, which is going to take place actually this very Saturday. So I was hoping you will stay longer because you could visit actually. Yeah, and this is a hackathon for the students here. They're going to come here and to the other rooms here around, and they're going to code together, trying to research things related to either digital humanities or data journalism, like things that concern like the study of media through digital methods, through computational methods, through corpora and stuff. We're also trying to raise awareness through media, through like creation of our own media. First, we created the academic mailing list. Basically, we have currently 500 subscribers. It's called like DH Herald basically. It's run by me, yeah, it has a URL vdigital.me. I should have put it here, but I forgot. And it currently has 10 issues. And it describes, it basically makes people aware of the best practices in DH, like global DH. We review papers from DSH, for instance, from Digital Humanities Quarterly. We review papers dedicated to DH pedagogy, how you can actually use this in class. We talk about like ancient roots of DH, like from both Russian and foreign, because there are lots of researches that's been done before computers came into being, and they were really insightful in terms of like ideas and approaches and hypotheses that people came up with, but they couldn't actually test them using the tools that we have, and it's actually kind of beneficial to go back there and explore. And some of this you can actually read in here. I mean, so my colleagues are trying to also raise awareness about the things that has been done in pre-computer era, which are really DH-y things, but without computers, basically. Once we've established this, we thought that we also need a more general public media, and we've established this. It's called Systemny Blok. It's unfortunately an untranslatable pun, because Blok is a Russian poet, one of the best Russian poets, and Systemny Blok is a computer case. So it's like a standard word for this big thing that holds the computer internals. So it's called Systemny Blok, and currently, and it went very well. We have like 55,000 subscribers on like VK, which is like the biggest Russian social network for people under 30, basically Russian Facebook, but better. Sorry, Facebook. Yeah, we also went on Telegram. We went, which is also a media platform in Russia. Which is used as a media platform very widely in Russia. We also have a Facebook account now, and we also have a website. And this actually also helps us drive more people in. Because people get interested in this stuff. Of course, it comes at a price, because we cannot do it like pure DH if we want to do it for general public. So we make it lighter. We make it like, it's not even 50% DH, I would say. It's like 30% DH, but still it's the only Russian media that has DH in focus. And it has a big coverage. I mean, not 1,000 people, but like 50,000 people. Another activity that we're doing here at the center, and I think it's like the crown gem in this whole thing of activities that we're doing. It's called Moscow Tartu DH School. It's held in the very picturesque suburb of Moscow, and it's kind of a research boot camp, I would say. People come there for like 3-4 days. We have a set of tutorials. You can get the picture of what happens there if you look closely at these posters. And it's very different from like European style, from like other types of DH schools that I've seen. I've been to DH at Oxford summer school once, and some people here have been to, I think Dinar has been to European University at Leipzig DH school, which is also like a very well-known DH school, and they are different because our school is less about like gaining skills, although you do gain skills there, and it's more about like gathering an interdisciplinary team and assembling it in a way that it produces meaningful research, meaningful results in the end. And we're going to have the 4th school this year. I mean, this is how it looks like. It's basically a several days non-stop hackathon of people from very different backgrounds, from programmers, from like industrial programmers to like people from like philology and like classical philology who are like pushed together because they are brought out from outside the city and they don't have anything to do but to collaborate. I mean, it's like an isolation that basically bears fruits. So they gather together and then in the end they present things. And yeah, so they present things to an interested community of researchers. And the presentations, of course, are fun, as you can see. And sometimes it actually, and it's very research based. So it's not about like creating instruments. It's not about learning skills. Although we have some sessions, preschool sessions, which are about learning, say, network analysis or stylometry. But mainly it's about research. And we have some pretty renowned researchers coming there, like Jan Rybicki, who is like one of the founding fathers of modern stylometry. Or you can see here Philip Gleisner from Stanford. I think he's now from Princeton, and next to him Alberto Acharbi, who is one of the very well-known people in the culture in the current field of cultural evolution, who is working at TU Eindhoven, I think. And so they are holding a workshop dedicated to the network analysis of late Soviet thick journals. Yeah, and some of these projects actually grow from like this 3 days project, 3 days like from the scratch projects to like long-term things. One of the things we have, which is related to history here, unfortunately we don't have Sonia Gavrilova, who is the head of the project, is Memory Wiki. It's done in collaboration with the Bremen University in Germany, and it's an online platform, basically online wiki, devoted to the memory studies and specifically to the topic of Soviet World War II prisoners and the practice of commemoration of them in Germany and in Russia and in Ukraine, and how are they different. Another long-standing project here is dedicated to Tolstoy. Tolstoy, as you can see, Tolstoy is basically our spiritual mascot. I mean, from there and from there. So Tolstoy, our affair with Tolstoy, I would say, started long ago. It basically coincides with the emergence of the whole center, and it starts with the project on the primary digitization of the whole 90-volume stack of books. It's like 2.7 meter high, and it wasn't done by us. It was done by a joint, a marvelous effort by ABI, the Russian OCR giant, which is probably known to you by Fine Reader, and the Tolstoy State Museum. And it was called, I think, the crowdsourcing wonder by The Guardian. So it was a really big project which involved like 4,000 of volunteers who crowdsourcingly OCR'd Tolstoy. And this enabled all sorts of things possible, and in these things already the center participated. There was this interactive mobile app called Live Pages, in which many students from here take part as basically people who do markup. And it's an innovative application to actually read books, not only Tolstoy anymore. It has now lots of books, including contemporary, including classics, Russian classic literature. And it has maps, it has timelines, it has basically character features like game style, basically. It's a gamification of reading, in a sense. Another outcome is TI markup, of course, because the next step in digitization, once you have like text, digital text, of course, is like provided with semantic markup, and that's what we're doing. This is part of markup for War and Peace, which, as you might see, if you're familiar with TI, as you might see, has speeches markup, has reference to people markup, including anaphoric references, which is also always a bugger if you're trying to do it automatically. It also has like some other sophisticated like semantic/linguistic markup, like semantic roles. And another outcome, this is actually part of my own thesis, which I recently defended, is like different network analysis approaches to the study of literature. If you have works of fiction like Tolstoy's works, which have like very complicated systems of characters involving more than 500 characters in a novel, you might actually get new insights on how these character systems and character spaces are built using digital tools. Because if you have like 26.3 thousand mentions of utterances of character in a novel, a human brain, of course, would not account for all of them and really realize where each character appears and disappears. And this, computers, they don't forget anything, right? And so they help us to lay all this lengthy novel into one space and explore it. So this is what we are doing here, and Frank Fischer is actually going to talk about other application of network analysis, which involves not novels but drama. And inspired by all these different outcomes that come from basically a single effort to digitize and mark up literary heritage of one person, we went on to another person, to Osip Mandelstam, who is like one of the best known Russian poets, even, I mean, some consider him even greater than Alexander Blok, which is already a high standard. And we have a Mandelstam Center here, so basically the main society for studying the heritage of Osip Mandelstam is situated here on the second floor. And together with them, we are trying to build an online bibliography, and then to proceeding to fully semanticized, digitized archive. We're trying to do it using common standards like TEI, so that we could then exchange data with other researchers and basically integrate it within the global literary scholarship. This is just a slide to mention Rusdrakor, on which you're going to hear a lot more from Frank Fischer, right?
Yeah.
So this is a project which is basically a spin-off of the efforts of our German colleagues who have been long doing work on digital analysis of drama, which is centered on network analysis. It is of course also TI based. So you first obtain proper TI markup of place, and then as a result you can do all sorts of things with place, including network analysis. And network analysis can give you very interesting insights into some place, especially if they have complicated network structure, like our favorite example with Boris Godunov. And if you want, I just don't know if Frank will mention it. If not, then we can talk about it later. So we are currently expanding our efforts in terms of this sort of long-term projects, not only media and publicity, which was necessary to start to gain the momentum to start the whole thing, but now people are growing more and more aware of the things, and now they're expecting real outcomes, real research. They're coming to us and asking, well, what can I do? Where can I participate? This is so cool. Let's do something together. So people are actually coming, and they're eager to participate in research. They're eager to hear about results of new research. They're eager to, so they're interested. And now that we got them interested, now we have to create systems to involve students, for instance, in order to get more things done, and to not let people be disappointed after they got all invigorated by this whole stuff. So we're trying now to scale these projects to other faculties, to other departments of our own faculty, basically we are trying to use master students as project managers, master students, for instance, in computational linguistics, who know some things about how to code, who know some things about how to manage projects already, and we're trying to involve them and involve some experts from other places, from other institutions, from other companies, and have students from here, philology students, history students, as the main working force for the projects. And we have some successful cases, like Rusdrakor, for instance, was very much done with students' involvement, including students from not only humanities faculty, but also from math faculty, from the electronic engineering faculty. There was a girl who has done very interesting research on small world properties of networks in Russian drama, who is studying basically in electronics engineering department of Wishka. So yeah, that's what we're trying to scale now. Basically, as ASA views our mission, is we're trying to convert this initial camp, a group of interest, a place for exchange, into a real data center, into a real resource center for the humanities. So we are trying to gain more in terms of like data suitable for research, like reproducible research, like data that's available to the whole scientific community, like this corpora of drama in TI. I mean, everybody can come and use them for their own research, and students come and use them. And for instance, we have a project in computational linguistics department, master's program, where people did it as their course project. They basically did a parser which extracts direct speech from the novels, which is a necessary thing. And when you're trying to do some literary scholarship, you constantly get into this problem that you have to pre-process your text, and you really have to create complicated resources, complicated systems tools to pre-process your corpus. If you, for instance, want to take only the narration part and not the dialogue part, it's really not a trivial task to separate these things. So they made this as their course project, and now people come to them from not only from philology but also from computer science department who wanted just for their neural networks to train, they need a data set, and this rule-based system can provide that data set. On the other hand, there is a commercial company called Exetera, which is basically doing tools for computer-aided text editing, and they also implemented this tool in their machine to use it as a feature, basically, if the text is as a feature for coreference resolution, because of course coreference, anaphoric pronominal coreference, like Vasya and Anna, like John and he, works differently in dialogues. So it all kind of converges, and we are starting to see some synergy in between here. But we're also seeing a lot of challenges in involving students from different faculties with different skills. That's why I was asking these questions. That's exactly why I was asking them. So yeah, we're trying to build some data infrastructure in which everybody could be involved. And yeah, we're facing challenges in terms of sometimes it's hard to get new servers, and it's hard to get technical staff skilled enough, and it's also hard that basically this is, for all of us, it's like basically a part-time thing. I mean, essentially it's a startup, because I teach computational linguistics. It's not like I am an employee of the center. I'm an employee of the School of Linguistics, and I teach computational linguistics there. And IC is running the whole master's program in computational linguistics, and other people are doing their own courses in history and in philosophy. And this, for everybody, it's basically a side thing, including like media, including organization of events. So this is basically the challenges, but all in all, they are becoming less of challenges and more of like opportunities, and because of this convergence and synergy. So we're hoping to proceed with these goals, and now I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. That was really, really interesting to know your approach, and I'm really impressed with how you're bringing people from different disciplines and what you're doing. Talking about the challenges that you've got, one of the things that we find is that knowing where to publish or deciding where to publish the work that comes from very collaborative and interdisciplinary projects is quite an interesting one. Because do you take your Digital Humanities project and publish about it in the traditional discipline journals, or do you publish in Digital Humanities focused journals? Do you do a combination of those? And do you find that staff from outside the humanities want to publish in different ways from staff within the humanities? And how does that relate to their things like career progression, things like this, which is obviously something...
Relate to what, sorry?
Things like career progression, because obviously it's very important to publish certain journals.
You don't say.
If you're a historian, there are some journals which are key to publishing, and if you're publishing in Digital Humanities journals as well, is that seen as a good thing or a bad thing? I'm just really interested to know what your approach to publication is resulting from some of the projects that you've been doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte, for a great question. I mean, I guess it concerns all of us, interdisciplinary people. The question was about publishing and the venues for publishing and how we basically choose them. So I would say we do both. We pick every fruit that hangs within the reach, basically, because we need to publish. And Vishka is in Russia, it's probably the strictest university in terms of like demands for publishing in good places. I mean, we have to publish in journals which are indexed by Scopus and not just indexed by, but fit in within like first 2 quartiles, unless you want problems. So basically we do both. We have publications in digital scholarship in the humanities, which is, I guess, the most respected in like traditional terms journal which is dedicated to digital humanities per se. We also publish in computational linguistics venues. Like computational linguistics is a field which sadly has less sadly less concerns about journals and more about conferences. So we had like we had to do a lot of lobbying so that conference papers in like major conferences were accounted as journal publications, because it's really hard, it's peer reviewed, it's all like it's really hard to get there. So you can publish digital humanities research in computational linguistics proceedings, say. You can also publish in some history journals, even though, I mean, we managed to publish a piece about War and Peace in the journal which is called Electronic Journal History. I think Dinara must know about it. So yeah, sometimes you manage to publish somewhere in a journal which is dedicated to the field which is not yours, basically, but they're also open to it, because all humanities face pressure from this demand to become digitized, and everything that is digitized kind of has like some bonus points to it, and that's what saves us, I guess. We also, where else? We also attempt to. We also attempt. Yeah, we publish in journals which are dedicated to like philology in general. For instance, there is like this very conservative and traditional journal called Herald of Moscow University. It has all sorts of disciplines. I mean, it's divided into disciplines, so it has like an issue on philology. And you can publish. I mean, it's possible to publish there. We also sometimes do like publications which we are not proud of, but which bring us credits from the like university authorities. Like there is this Journal of Web Semantics. I mean, it's dedicated to things like RDF and like hardcore ontology building, like engineering side of it, not the humanities side of it. But they had a special issue on digital humanities, and we went there because we know it's a Scopus Quartile 1 journal, basically. So, and we published there this year. So that's basically what we do. The main problem is conferences, because you go to conferences and you really invest some time and effort into doing talks there, but these things don't really account for much. I mean, mostly not at all. So, and what's your experience? Just if you can answer briefly.
Yeah, relatively similar to yours, in that we try to publish in both traditional subject-based journals and digital humanities journals as well. Mm-hmm. I haven't collaborated personally with, say, computer scientists on publication, and I don't know how that would go, but I'm aware that in a lot of the science disciplines within the UK, certainly there's a tendency towards co-authorship. Lots of people appearing on paper contributing, whereas in humanities there's I think it's probably fair to say that there's still an emphasis on single authorship, and that's actually an important part of what you need to do to show that to show your excellence at the school. I think sometimes there's a tension, certainly within the UK system, where digital humanities projects, because of their very nature, are highly collaborative, and you tend to either want or need to publish collaboratively, but there's also this sense that you should be publishing as a single author alongside that. And I think that's still something you haven't really resolved if you tend to do something.
Yeah, sure, but I think it's actually good. I mean, the digital humanities is precisely the place and time where it has to change. I mean, this idea that it should be single-authored, because it's really impossible to make a good digital humanities project single-handedly, I would say. Other questions?
Can I ask the, I suppose, predictable Dean's question, which is how are you funded? You say that the centre is what you do when you're not doing your other job, and yet you're running conferences and other activities. So
Yeah.
where does the funding come from?
Yeah, this is of course a question that Asya would answer much more detailed than me, because, well, it's not kind of my domain, but from what I know in general, we have some support from the faculty, thanks to our dean, and we have some support from like the university itself. And yeah, you can get support you can basically apply for holding a conference at Vyška.
Right.
It's done. So we are not doing it from our own pocket. You can apply to, like, we have all sorts of like scientific commissions, but faculty level and university level, which grant specific events, basically, which grant schools, for instance. So you can get a grant. Of course, it involves heavy bureaucracy, and sometimes I really pity that we have to waste resources of our helpers, especially like students, on that thing. And it's better to have some sort of some bigger fixed budget rather than always apply for funding, because it steals a lot of time. But I certainly cannot complain that the center doesn't. That you can that you don't get enough money, for instance, to hold a school or a conference. Yeah, that can be done. We also have like you can always get personal funding at least once a year from the faculty. Again, thanks to the faculty, to go to the conference, including like going somewhere as far as Sydney or Mexico. I've been to both, like when there was a DH conference, and it was always funded by the university. So yeah, we also have a manager, I think, on the payroll. Like, it's a small wage. It's like it's done by our recent graduate, basically, who is also doing teaching here. So it's not a full-time job. I mean, it's not a full-time job for anybody. What we have some sources of funding. I think we are considered a project group by the university, and the project groups do get some funding.
So is there an ambition to make appointments in the future, maybe to have professors who are based in the center?
Yeah, there certainly are. It depends on how much. It's also. There are organizational forms supported by the university, like научно-учебная лаборатория. Yeah, you could translate it like basically research/study laboratory. So it's a laboratory where you have staff and you have students, and both, I think, get some funding. You have to do a lot of paperwork to do that, but it's not impossible, of course, and we have plans. It's just that we can't evolve faster than we evolve.
Sure.
So we are trying to first build up some muscle in terms of like people just coming here and being interested, and then with publications, we can apply for further things. So of course, this is going to evolve. This is going to develop. We're going to have bigger and better rooms soon. I mean, we have them already. We just have to move. So it's all kind of evolving. It just takes time to grow. I would say. Yeah, we don't get like single piece 1.2 million pounds funding. Yeah, that's for sure. But otherwise, there are possibilities for growth. And of course, there is like a lot of just healthy volunteering there. Like, people want to do this stuff. Some people want to do stuff. People get interested, and they just come and do stuff.
So on your dean's question, I can give my dean's answer.
Yeah, please.
So we still pay for this. But I hope maybe it will develop.
Right. Very interesting.
So we move smoothly further on, I think.
Yeah, I think we can move to like dedicated talks. So
I need to pull up a PowerPoint.
Huh?
I need to pull up a PowerPoint. Can I sign into my? Can I use yours? Computer?
Yeah, sure. If it's okay.
I'm just gonna wait a second to sign into my account.
Yeah. Do you need assistance?
No, I just need to take
the browser. Just because it's plugged in.
Sorry.
That's why it's.
Which one do you think?
So you need.
Yeah. Thank you. impromptu tea break.
Huh?
It's an impromptu tea break.
Yeah.
All right.
It's actually very like traditional within this room to have like meetings rather more informal than you traditionally have at conferences. Like people come here, just drink tea, eat cookies, and listen at the same time. So it's like a traditional thing.
We do something similar. We've got a breakout space in the lab where we've got some company seats and 20 people just taking and dropping and chat to us about things they want to do.
Yeah, we also have a system of student volunteers who help us with like hanging posters and like you said, like this administrative stuff for running basically the room. And they also feel free. They have the freedom to come here. I mean, their primary motivation is that they have the key and they can come here and just sit quietly and study, or help us with projects like and get involved.
Good. All right.
This one is closed, yeah, so you have to go
I lost my audience.
next to the elevator. I mean, usually we have one right here, but it's closed for capital repairs.
Okay, I'm Seth Bernstein. I'm docent, or assistant professor in the School of History here at Higher School of Economics. I've been here for 6 years now. And a couple years ago, starting from 2018, I decided to form a group with some students called, it's a research study group, or a NIUK as it's abbreviated in Russian. It's a very beloved term here because it means money. It involves at least one faculty member, that's the assistant professor or higher level, some students, maybe graduate students, whatever. They give you funding to work with students in a kind of apprenticeship, right? So you're holding seminars once every 3 weeks or a month. You're doing some kind of practical project with these students that isn't like a class, right? It's not, they're learning things, of course, but they're also doing things. There's supposed to be some kind of practical outcome. I don't want to make you jealous, but we got 1.4 million rubles to do it, which is a lot for students. It's a lot for students. Okay, I know it's not. We didn't build a center, but for students it was a big deal. For them, it meant they didn't have to work at other places. So it was very good, and they were very happy to help with this project, which I'll talk about. But to give you the idea of where some of these, to answer the question that came up before, how do you do DH here? Where does the money come from? There are little pots of money here and there, and this is one of the better pots of money to find. I know that Frank has done this too, and I don't know if you're doing another group next year, but
Not right now.
yeah, but it seems very possible to do this if you can get enough students involved. I know that Dimitri Anatolievich is presenting about the same program, or his project from this same program. The requirements. There's always, the money always comes with requirements, and the requirement is to publish. So, the framework here is that you have to fit into the goals of the university. They don't just write a blank check for you to found a DH center or do a DH group. Here, it's usually publications. So you have to publish one good article as determined by Scopus, or 2 or more articles or publications in lesser venues. So it's a challenge, right? I think there's a challenge from 2 or 3 angles, the things we've been talking about. The one challenge is to mix these computational methods with a traditional scholarly approach, especially if you have a group for a year and you get renewed the second year. A lot of journals don't move that fast, so you have to really, Digital Humanities works very fast in a lot of ways. You can just put up a site and do really great work in months, whereas publishing in a traditional journal can take 3 years sometimes if it's a really good one, if it's the top tier. The other challenge is from the DH side. balancing a computationally rigorous project with this more presentation-oriented DH field. And I think the field is that, the centers that are growing around DH are mostly interested, at least in the English language world, in presentation, right? In attracting an audience from the public as much as from scholars. So what we actually did, we put in for a group that would digitize KGB records, ones that have been, police records, that have been partially digitized, so they're photographed. They're available in repositories like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, or things that I have digitized in Ukraine recently. I photographed my phone. And turning those into databases, and then working with them to create some kind of new information about how policing worked in the Soviet Union, especially during, in the aftermath of World War II. So we have 3 projects that are kind of related. We finished more or less one, or at least the digitization part of it, and a little bit of the publication. And then we're working on 2 for our second year. So the main project that we worked on last year, it's a database of people who are accused of being collaborators during World War II. So Soviet, Germany and its allies came into Ukraine, into Belarus, into other areas of the Soviet Union. They had to set up a government, some kind of working administration, and they attracted people who would help them. And in concentration camps, and in Germany itself, they attracted people who would help them guard concentration camps and do all sorts of, be helpers in some capacity. When they came back to the Soviet Union, or when they were discovered in the Soviet Union, they were accused of being collaborators. There's a specific charge in the Soviet legal code. And they were tried in secret trials after a long investigation that involved many interrogations. We found 955 of these cases at the Holocaust Museum. So, not found them, but took them from the Holocaust Museum with their permission. The cases range from 1944 until the 1980s. Most of them are from the early period. They're individual and group cases, so there's some cases where one person was tried. I think we found Ivanov, who was the policeman for this town in Ukraine. Yeah. And then there are some cases of groups, so Crimean Tatars, so this group that was expelled from Crimea after World War II or during it. They would try groups of, I think, as many as 20 of these Crimean Tatars, and it's all one case. Yeah, so we took all those cases that involve arresting information, interrogations, other evidence, an indictment, then the trial itself, and then appellate documents. So later on, they might say, I want to be rehabilitated, even though I took a bunch of Soviet POWs to a ditch and had them shot, right? Something like that. Sometimes happens. But some people actually appeal for good reasons. And then you get kind of interesting information too, or interesting evidence. Like, this is from a case where there was a concentration camp guard, and so they did some forensic evidence. Sometimes they would dig up the scenes and then include that in the file. So what did we do with that? Nothing interesting with the actual pictures. We did something very boring, or at least it was boring for the students. It was interesting for me. They looked at every one of those 955 cases, or each of the 955 accused, and created a database with something like 50 points for each of them. So we're talking about, I'll show you. So here's the arrest form. So whenever someone came into the secret police's orbit, whenever they were arrested, you had a long form filled out that has lots of information. I mean, the challenge of working with these police files is often that you don't know what's true and what's false, especially in the interrogations. So you can read through the interrogations, but you can't know if they're being coerced to say what they say. But they're not going to coerce their name, they're not going to coerce their date of birth, they're not going to coerce their nationality. I mean, you could change that, but probably not. Right. So we took that and plugged it into this database, and then I plugged it into Python, which I could have done something easier, but it was easy for me, so I did that. And I did a cross-tabulation. Did cross-tabulation on it, so looking for people who were arrested for being a police officer and who were Ukrainian. How many years of punishment did that equal, right, for most of them? Someone who was, I don't know, you can think of all the permutations. Someone was a woman and was accused of being an informant. What did that mean? How many people were given the death penalty, and for what? So we could have just stopped there, and the Holocaust Museum would have been very happy to have that database. We gave it over to them. But the idea here was to connect it to research questions. I mean, that's the challenge, right? To take a database that's useful for people who are maybe doing research on the Holocaust in Ukraine, and they want to know all the cases that happened in Kiev, something like that, or they wanted to be able to find the cases of women collaborators in Kiev. That helps them do that. But I think there's some things you can do with this medium data. I don't think it's big data, but 1,000 cases is pretty good. You can answer important questions about Stalinist justice. Right? So before World War II, there's the idea that Stalin's Soviet Union was correct idea, that a lot of the trials in the Soviet Union were based on coercion. And the question is, with collaborators, people who are in some ways rightfully being accused of doing things during the war. I mean, we could talk for ages, and I have with lots of people about whether it's right or wrong to punish these people. If they were coerced by the Germans and then coerced by the Soviets, and afterwards, is it right to punish them, and for how long, and so on. Those are kind of like questions for a preacher, not for a historian. But we can see from the database that actually it's not the same kinds of targets from the 30s. So it's not social groups that are being targeted. It's not people who were rich before the revolution, which are big targets in the 30s. People who are classic Marxist-Leninist enemies. It's actually people who did something during the war, who are men who are in their 20s and were in a good position to become police officers for the Germans. Right, and then you can also see from this database the construction of the term collaborator. So thinking not about collaborator as a reality, but collaborator as something that has a legal and political valence, right? It's kind of like, it's a construction. Like I think that'll be familiar to all of you, right? It's construction. It's not something that, it has some kind of basis in reality because people did work for the Germans, but collaborator is a term that also has, especially in Russia today, a very negative connotation. And it comes from this, and we can see how that term was, where its origins are in some ways here. Right. So you see an attempt to find real enemies, people who did something during the war, to punish real actions rather than kind of an imagined, falsified enemy. But also that the enemy, the collaborator, it is shaped by a constructed notion of what a collaborator should be. If that makes sense. So it's a little both. Right. So we did that project, and we published in Soviet and post-Soviet review, I think the last issue, an article on it called Aggregate Treason, or Aggregate Treason, depending on how you want to dual term, right? Is it aggregate treason, or are we aggregating treason? I don't know. And then it's actually become a really useful database for the students, because I know at least one or two are writing their diploma papers on it, or using it at least in part. And then a graduate student who will be defending this year, Irina Mikhailova, is writing articles from it as well. So she has a really interesting article that probably will not be published in Russian ever about some of the collaborators who then she found in a database of people who won medals during the war. So there's this database in Russian called Podvig Naroda. How do you translate that? The deeds of the people, like the great feats of the people. It lists all the people who won medals during the war. And some of the people who won medals were also some of the people who were arrested or shot, right? So, I mean, it shows a really interesting, it shows about the wartime experience that, you know, someone's hero is going to be someone's villain the next day. Right? And also about contemporary memory culture in Russia and how it does not really grapple with those issues. Anyway, a very interesting thing that should come out in Journal of Slavic Military History. Q1, Scopus.
Medal.
No coincidence. Right, and so this year we're building on that one project that was successful. And one of the things I like about this group is that it does allow for a lot of student involvement. So I trained Irina to manage this group. She did a really good job of getting the students to turn in the work, to make sure they knew how to clean the data, and she did a lot of it too. And she trained an apprentice, a master's student, Vasilina Chernyshova, who is curating this database this year. So I'm taking a step up, I guess, and Irina's taking a step up, and Vasilina's taking a step up. So this database is people who were taken by the Germans and their allies to work in the Axis economies during the war. They came back to the Soviet Union in 1944, 45, 46, and they were filtered. They went through an interrogation when they came home, and they had to fill out one of these forms too, a similar form, not of someone who's being arrested, but of someone who's being suspected of maybe having been a collaborator. Most of them were not arrested, so 93% of the people who were abroad during World War II were outside of the Soviet Union and then came back, were not arrested, but they all had to have this form and were put on the secret police rolls. Again, a really big source of data. Some of it's been digitized at the Holocaust Museum, and students took it from there, and now we're in the process of making another one of these databases that I think can tell us about the kinds of people who went to Germany, right, who were taken, what they did in Germany, because there's a lot of geographical data, and even what they did before the war, because there's a lot of data about where they were working, what kinds of people were attractive for the Germans to take, or not attractive for them to take. So that's a really promising project, especially because I'm writing a book about the people who came back. So I will be using this successfully. Then the last project that we're going to do is a migrant database from the 1950s. So in the 50s, after Stalin died, a lot of these people, so most of the people who were outside of the Soviet Union during World War II came home. So 5.6 million came home. Some of them didn't. These were non-returners, and they went to, the United States, Canada, Australia, Latin America. And there are also people who had emigrated from the Soviet Union or from places that would become part of the Soviet Union in the 30s and the 20s, earlier, mostly to Argentina and to South America. Then in the 50s, after Stalin died, all of a sudden it's much more attractive to come back to the Soviet Union once Stalin's not there, and you are not, you don't fear as much that you will be prosecuted for having been abroad. And more than 10,000 people came back. The KGB made a very long list of all of them. Ukraine's secret police archive is now open, very open, and I photographed it all. So we have this big database. I think about 3/4 of it is already digitized. We've typed it up already, and then we'll do the last quarter and then try to do something with that, thinking about the geography of migration during the Cold War, who's voting for communism and who's voting for capitalism, something like that. That's all I have to say about these projects. I'm happy to talk about them more or about the process of working with students. I can tell you a lot about repatriation if you want, a whole book's worth. But,
question.
does Zdadim stand
Oh,
for?
Zdadim? Yeah. So I don't remember what I did, but I'm very.
Is it some sort of
It's an acronym.
abbreviation?
Yeah. I can look it up. I can look up what Zdadim means. But so Zdadim, it not only means that it's.
It means pass exams.
But also
And it's also an abbreviation, apparently, right?
Yeah, it's like
Submit an article to Scopus.
that's exactly what we were thinking of. So it means like I actually wrote it up. Yeah, look up my group. It's his.hse.ru/Zdadim. But what did I translate it as? Oh yeah, we deliver. So we're delivering articles. That was a subtle hint to the committee that was deciding whether to fund us or not. Yeah, Zdadim.
Thanks. That's really interesting because we're thinking about how to develop digital humanities teaching at Exeter. So I guess one of the questions is this something that's it's a course in the sense that students can get credits for doing this? So how do you assess the students? What do you hope that they get out of it in terms of digital skills? Just those kind of things. Have you kind of thought through some of those questions?
It's not a course. They don't get any credit for it. They get money.
Okay.
Right? They get paid. It's sort of like an internship.
Right.
It could have. I mean, we could attach a project to it. So there's another area that it doesn't come with money, but it does come with credits. So you can attach a project to something like this, and then they would be assessed on a A2 or 10-point scale in Russia. In this case, it's kind of like a job, right? I assess them as workers. If they didn't do a good job, they wouldn't have been renewed for this year, right? Now, in terms of skills, of course, I want them to develop these digital skills in particular because they can go into this Digital Humanities Center. They can go into the Digital Humanities Master's program that's starting this year. Some of them are using it for their theses, right? But this program is it's innovative, I think. It's innovative in the sense that, the professor has to have an interest in having this project done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I have an interest in doing this because I'm going to publish something from it. I co-authored an article with Irina, the graduate student who was doing this project in particular. There are pluses and minuses to it because if it was a more controlled academic scenario, the learning outcomes might be clearer. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, because it's actually a practical project that has a deliverable rather than just kind of grade, the students feel more invested in a sense, right? It's not just play.
Something that's very big in the UK is the exploration of genealogy and providing socio-economic histories. Is a project like this something that you see interesting from members of the public who want to find more about their ancestors, perhaps? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Well, so we've been very cautious about this database, especially the collaborator database. The collaborator database, we have not published with names because we're afraid of, so under Ukrainian law, we could publish it. Under Russian law, we're not sure. So we haven't done it. We haven't published with the names. We're not interested so much in the names, but of course there are people who would be interested. We presented this at the Gulag Museum a couple months ago, end of last year. And I thought we were going to get a lot of questions about how we were anti, we were pro-Stalinist, right? That we were saying, oh, these collaborators, they deserve what they got. We got exactly the opposite questions, right? Do you think more of them should have been shot? Something like that. It was very interesting reaction, but it shows you that this is still a kind of a lightning bolt or a lightning rod issue. Now on the other ones, the big Ukrainian databases, right? People who came back, that's less of a I think people would just be interested. I mean, I definitely thought about applying for state funding to get millions of names. I mean, it's a million, several million people would be in that database. I just don't know if there's the appetite for it in Russia. I mean, there is this huge database called Obeden Memorial. It's all the people, in theory, who served in World War II, right? It's 10 million people. It's a huge, it was one of the biggest state digital humanities projects in the world. Seriously, I mean, it's like, and they also like guard their data very
We're going to use it for our hackathon on Saturday, by the way.
You
want to come by?
How are you going to use it?
Huh?
How are you going to use it?
We're going to overlap it and the database from the other memorial, which is the repressions database.
Oh, interesting.
So
how are you going to take the data out?
We already did, through a loop in the server.
Huh?
Through a loop in the server.
Cool. I tried to do it, but with Python and whatever.
We had a software engineer skilled enough.
I'm going to talk to you about that later. But there's an appetite for doing things that show the heroism of World War II. There's not an appetite for doing things that show the less savory side of the war. Yeah, at least from the state side, where there'd be a lot of fun.
I think we should get going.
Yeah.
So
good. Thank you.
So, thank you very much. And so we should move to the next presentation, and this will be of Professor Dobrovolsky about the prosopography of the old Jewish age, which was involved.
First of all, sorry for again being. Shall I use this one?
Sure. Да, конечно. Пожалуйста. Успел сам перелистывать только.
My name is Dmitry Dobrovolsky, and I'm an associate professor in the School of History, but I'm not dealing with modern history. I'm a medievalist, and what I'm going to present is not just my project, but it's the project, most of all, of my colleague, Dr. Andrei Vinogradov, who is unfortunately who could not attend today for some specific reasons. And most of all, what I'm going to present was his idea, and I'm rather a technician and a kind of the one who can do some computing for all this project. So I would like to present a students' research group named People and Texts, names People and Texts of Old Rus. And it is a 2-year research project which is ongoing right now. And the intention of this project is to create a sort of database, or rather a sort of wiki, which would combine and aggregate the data on all the personalities we know from the history of pre-Mongol and Mongol Russia. Our chronological borders are from the most early times, from Varangian time, and to the end of the 13th century. And what we are intended to do is to make some kind of auxiliary resource where every researcher could just check if this or that person is known from this or that source, and so on and so forth. There are plenty of such auxiliary materials, such encyclopedic materials for Byzance. For example, German project, English project is ongoing as well, and we have several projects for Russian, for Muscovy, first of all, and there is a very well-known book of Stepan Borisovich Veselovsky, who collected the data on all the officials of Muscovy Tsardom from 15th to 17th century, which is very useful when you just need to check some person. Could he have been here or there in the moment you're interested? But unfortunately, we have no such data for earlier period. And first of all, we were planning to make a sort of wiki, and then we found out that it was not very effective due to some limitations on the wiki format. And one of the purpose of our group was to find the new format to represent the information. So this slide I just collected mostly for myself, the reason behind all this activity, what we were going to obtain, and which use cases do we suppose will be possible for such sort of data. At one hand, and for what I would use it for my own research, it is something connected with attribution and interpretation of historical sources. And here I just was the example which I had an opportunity to present on one of our research group seminars, where I was just talking about a very funny thing that we've got 2 or maybe even 3 writers named Theodosius in the short period from the middle of 11th century till the middle of the 20th century. And we don't know how to attribute some texts which are attributed to one of the Theodosius, but should have been written most probably by other Theodosius. So we have to count all the people bearing the name Theodosius and to check their biographies to find out to which of them the text we are now trying to attribute fits the best. Well, and so it looks like I sort of found one to whom the text can be attributed. And the other thing, more interesting and strictly tightly connected with very popular now, with a very popular now direction in studies, which is studying of social networks, is to understand how tight were the networks we read in the sources. For example, there is a very well-known group of sources from medieval Russia, Birchbark letters, and there is a big question about who were the authors and who were the addressees of the Birchbark letters, because if there are plenty of people from all the stratums of Novgorod society, we can then say that Novgorod was a very literate society, that literacy was widespread, and so forth. On the other hand, if we find out that all the authors form a very tight network where almost everybody knew each other, and there are many Birchbark letters noticing princes and relations with princes, relations with so-called posadniks, heads of Novgorod Republic, that would mean that what we have found comes from a very tight stratum and a very tight elite of Novgorodian society, which would in turn change our understanding of how the literacy was spread in Novgorod times and in Russian times. So to check all the possible hypotheses, we need some kind of historical network to be drawn and then to be checked for tightness. And that might be the second use case which could make these data interesting. So the specific is that we have if compare the information with what Professor Bernstein had presented, we have no files on any person just due to the fact that there was no bureaucracy those times, and so nobody ever could pose the problem of writing some kind of biography organized and collected in one place. Well, what we have to do with is a group of mentions spread among many sources. And this is the easy situation when the person is mentioned 4 times in the same very source. So all we know about Jan Vyshatich is grouped in one chronicle. And the task is just to find these entries and just to collect the information from them in one place to make it more handy to work with. And the other situation is one of my examples, which I proposed you on the previous slide. You may see that to check the biography of some Theodosius of the Caves, you need to collate the data coming from his life, the data coming from the early chronicles, and the data coming from the texts supposedly attributed to this person. So you need to have somebody who just checks all the 3 types of sources and groups the information from these sources into into some one place, into some article like wiki or something like that. So just what the students are doing within our research group, every student receives some some task to do. Most of them work with one source, but all of them have to put the information in one structure. And if we find out that our person is mentioned in many sources, and collation of the data from several sources just allows us to understand the biography better, just all of the data are combined into one article. What we had to do just to make access to this article for many workers at the same time, just to allow them to combine the information from different sources. And what we hope to obtain is just a sort of this combination, just like Stepan Veselovsky did. He was just looking through all the available bureaucratic papers of Muscovy and just writing out every mention of every person to combine them in some. Well, so and the second problem we come across is that prosophagraphic data are not just fragmentary, but they also require high expertise to join them correct. The problem is that, for example, Jan Vyshatich was dead in 1106. And in the same very 1106, we know about some other Jan who leaded the military expedition against Polovtsians. And it is almost evident, but not for all, that these are two different persons. But why I say not for all, just because, for example, Cross and Shergovitz-Wedzer, who were translating Russian primary chronicle into English, they thought this all was about one person. So there is some kind of very very strange gloss insisting that Jan Vyshatich, the military leader, and Jan Vyshatich, the old man who died the same very year in 19 years, are the same person. Well, I don't know why. And the problem is, of course, that we have to teach students to criticize source data and to analyze them correctly. And what we will need for the nearest future is a sort of expertise from, so to say, senior researchers who can just check what had they combined, and maybe sometime just to separate the articles back, because it relates to different persons. Well, so first of all, I thought that it could be implemented via the wiki hosting at PBWorks. I was looking for some free wiki hosting and came across this site. What was very good that we could provide our students with a Wysiwyg editor, so we hadn't to teach them any sort of coding, which was a crucial thing for us, just because we and my colleague Dr. Vinogradov, we just called everyone to participate, because it is really a hard work to scroll through this plenty of sources in Old Russian, and to write down the mentions we needed for our project. It was I'm afraid, too strict to require people also to code. So we had to search some handy tool for them. But it also had plenty of drawbacks. And first of all, we could not find out how to enforce the structure of the article, how to check if the article is full enough to keep the information, to keep all the needed information about personality we are studying now, or to separate full articles from not very full articles, to maintain the structure of articles, and so forth. So we had some problems. And when, for example, I came across the need to extract bulk data from this wiki, I found out that PBWorks returned very dirty HTML code, which just couldn't be loaded into the program I wrote to do some manipulations I wanted to do. So we had to change the So we had to change the platform for all of this. Well, that's just to show how it looks like, how it looked like. You can see the headings in black font, just following the structure of Byzantine prosopography, which my colleague Andrei Vinogradov selected to be, so to say, the best example of the genre. So we were following it, and it ends with the reference and the sources and literature we used for this, that our students used for this article. And now what we have now, it is a specially designed database. We had an opportunity to involve a student from the Faculty of Computing for our project, who just wrote us a database and wrote an interface for the database where just all the information from the article was separated into textual fields. They all maintain long text, so we can write long narratives if we need to. Well, and the very good thing about it is that this database allows us to see if the article is full or not very full, if we have to check what is going on in this or that way. And so just to shorten the talk, which perspectives are now behind us? We are just, first of all, what was very good about PB Works, that we could cross-reference the articles, just to, we could seek for the way to represent the network and the network connections, which is really crucial for our project. Now, when we switched to this written specially database, we unfortunately lost this cross-reference mechanism. Problem is that Russian language is flective language, so you have words with endings, where you have words in different cases, and what we need now is a mechanism to recreate the cross-references, and what we have to do as well, we have to make it aware about the declination of words. And the second problem is that we need some sort of peer reviewing mechanism. There are plenty of data now. There are several hundreds of articles. But what we need to peer review in different Professor Bernstein's project. We don't have any formula already created in the sources. Well, students are writing that texts on their own, and what they are writing, it is just some very difficult thing. Well, and the third problem and the third perspective, tightly connected with the previous, we have to elaborate some sort of vocabulary to formalize the biographies, to reduce the level of literariness in these articles. I read some of them and I found out they were almost poems. Well, and now what we have to do is just to reduce all this poetry and to change it into some more or less formal language. When I presented this project several weeks ago at a conference, I was advised to use some sort of ontology. For example, ontology of professions, or maybe ontology of social statuses, but I'm afraid it is going to be a sort of overkill, because there are not many personalities about which we know in details their profession or their their career and so forth. But some sort of formal language has to be elaborated, for sure. Well, and that's what I was going to present. We have a website, as every Grishka's NUK has to have some website, and if you're interested in, you can find out all about us on this website. Unfortunately, it is only in Russian, but you can write letters, and I suppose I will be able to answer in English, despite my language is really poor. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. What about questions? This.
No. Now you'll have to.
Not my field.
I just have a suggestion, which is, for the declinations, there's a Python toolkit called NLTK, Natural Language Toolkit. And that does stemming. It'll give you that very easily.
Thank you.
Yeah, NLTK.
me if I had to make the necessary trip to the fourth floor. I wondered if you had come across something called Standards for Networking Ancient Possibilities.
Sorry?
It's what is it called? Standards for Networking Ancient Possibilities. And I mention it because they make certain recommendations of control for categories for some of the things that you were mentioning. I thought it might be useful to consult.
We have discussed with even some of the authors of those standards, as far as I understand. But well, I'm not afraid I can explain why. But we found out that it just didn't fit absolutely to all of our needs. The problem is that we have to first of all we have to elaborate our own lexics in Russian and concerning with Russian realities, which is a bit different to ancient.
No, absolutely. I just wondered whether there was a possibility of using some of the same methods. But it sounds like you've already explored that possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. When are you going to open the database, and is it easy to publish it online?
Well, it can be. It is. For now, it is closed. It is just on the password because it hadn't been peer-reviewed. So we just cannot open it for wide access because there are plenty of the data are not very high quality, so to say. But when we are through that peer reviewing etap, it can be opened. It is intended to be opened. It is even now it is working via the internet, so all the internet stuff is already available. So just maybe in 2 or 3 years it will be open.
Questions? Well, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
We shall move. We shall make one step further. And Dinara Gagarina will present the experience of our Perm colleagues. This will be the last presentation for the first part.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Dinara Gagarina. I'm from Perm campus, and I'm head of Department of Humanities. I have worked in High School of Economics only for 1 year, and most of my digital humanities projects were implemented in other university, and these examples of projects which I will present now, this project were made in 2 universities. I work in digital humanities in 2 directions. The first one is digital history, and especially historical databases and historical information systems. And second direction is digital humanities pedagogy, because before I came to digital humanities, I specialized in pedagogy. So my presentation has 3 parts. And the first part is historical information systems and databases. I have to say that we mostly work not with TI and non-SQL databases as you. In our project, we now do not use existing databases or similar product. We mostly work with SQL databases, relational databases. But what is interesting is that we work with this field in 2 levels. The first one, for almost 15 years, we have developed different projects connected with different parts of history, and we developed a series of historical databases. And the second direction that we implemented, that it is theoretical level, and I hope this year our book, Historical Information Systems, will be published. It's now in publishing house, and we are interested in theory of how to develop historical databases, different types of historical databases, what approaches there is, classifications, how to use it, different models of creation and different models of use databases in historical research, different algorithms to use databases for different types of research, prosopographical research or source study research, and so on. Have for this project is finished now, and we have website digitalhistory.ru, and I will say about this site a little bit later. So what is historical information systems? How we understand it? It's very wide term. I will show you some examples. There are our examples from different fields of history. The first one is per newspapers, and it's a collection of 12 newspapers which were published in Perm region in the beginning of 20th century. And I also will say some words about this project a little bit later. The second example is Ethnic Union of Russian Army in the First World War. It is also our project, and this project was the head of this project is Professor Podkretov, and the head of this project is Professor Kornienko. What we have here, it's a catalog, a list of units with very detailed description, which you can see here, and it's a list of persons, a list of maps, and list of publications, and for each unit we can see a list of persons who is connected with this unit, and we can see maps and so on. So it's another model of historical databases. And my third example is parliamentary history of pre-revolutionary Russia, and this project is implemented under the head of the head of the project is Professor Kiryanov. So it's different. It's different teams in aspect of historical problems, but in all these projects, for example, I was involved from database part. So, what is historical information systems? It's description here, how we understand it, and I think a lot of you know, for example, Professor Manfred Thaler and Peter Dorn, who were involved in discussions of historical databases, and there are two different approaches to historical databases. One of them source-oriented approach, and second one problem-oriented approach. These two approaches to databases also can be applied to historical information systems. And what does it mean? This project is source-oriented. It means that the structure of this database, of these information systems, similar to the structure of newspapers, types of publications, rubrics, and so on. This project is problem-oriented. Information for this database we collect from different sources, and we do not use structure of these sources. And this one, it's, as we see here, this method-oriented approach and mixed. Of course, most of projects are mixed. And here's mixed approach, but this part, unfortunately, all of these projects are only in Russian. This part is a prosopographical model of the project, and using this tool we can provide prosopographical research. So some parts of this project are made under method-oriented approach. Again, about digital history of the true. This project contains more than 800 historical information systems and databases. And we collected from different languages, different countries, different historical fields. And this project contains both projects which are available now in internet and which are not available. And for example, there are a lot of projects, a lot of databases from 90s and even from late 80s. And information about these databases we can read only in publications. And the second part of this project is more than 500 publications about historical databases, also in different languages and from different times and countries. And what we tried to do with this project to analyze history of historical information science, historical information systems, and historical databases, and we tried to analyze dynamics and try to classify historical databases and so on. Of course, we have a rather detailed description. It's about 30 attributes of historical information systems, and also a description of publications. Of course, we have some search tools. We use this project, for example, in working with students when they have to find information systems or electronic historical sources for their diploma projects and so on. And there's just a list of possibilities how we can use it. I think I will skip this slide and go further. The second part of my presentation is project per newspapers, the true. I said about it before. I just want to show you some slides, some screenshots of this project. As I said, there's not 12, 13 newspapers, and they're very different newspapers. Some of them was published every day for a long time. Some of them have only 20 issues, and altogether there are about 2,500 issues. And the period which we take in this project is 1914 till 1922, and it's a very interesting period of Russian history, and not only Russian history. So we can see in these newspapers changes in Russia, changes in Perm region. And what is also interesting is that in spite of these newspapers were published in Perm, they have very wide themes, and they also wrote about different countries in Europe, and not only Europe. For example, one of my students had not very big research about how Japan was represented in these newspapers, and it's rather interesting. We have description, of course, again meta description of newspapers, of every issue, and of article. We do not take all articles of these newspapers. We are interested mostly in articles connected with war, First World War, and also revolution. There was some projects that we will connect all together. And for each article, there is very detailed description, not only with bibliographical attributes, but also, for example, we try to find all geographical places and all persons who mentioned in this article, keywords, and so on. We provided OCR for all of these newspapers, but sometimes, not sometimes, very often, the quality of this OCR very poor. And so we need a lot of manually editing of the text, which was automatically OCR'd. It's just an example of little publication about Paris, just to show that not only perm and perm problems in these newspapers. Of course, some search tools, and according to questions of Professor Boitsov, are these projects only representation, or also we can obtain some new historical information? Yes, of course, we want to to retrieve new information. And what about these projects? There was a lot of student projects, but also there was one PhD project connected with these newspapers, and it was the research was based on tools that this project provided. But of course, when we represent it in such seminars or conferences, we mostly say about representation side. We show how it looks like, how many newspapers, how many records, and so on. It's very important question, because some of people who do not like digital humanities, they usually say that digital humanities is only about representation, not about analytics. So thank you for your question. This question wasn't for me, but sorry. What we can obtain? Different quantitative characteristics, different samples for various themes of publications, and then work with these publications in our usual methods, or maybe not usual methods. And my last very short part of this presentation, in what I'm interested in mostly now, our team want to understand how to construct digital humanities course for different types of students. For example, for bachelor students in history, or master students in digital humanities, and maybe for usual people. And we try to, firstly, we develop or searching publications in different universities' syllabuses, different types, different models of this course, and then we try to test it in different types of students groups. We have now, I think, five experimental groups. That was very different, and we, for example, can see that in one group, in one type of group, course of digital humanities based on data types is very good idea. For example, people from computer science understand what is it, what is different data types, and how we can put it on the field of humanities. We also try to use course which was constructed with students, together with students, oh, sorry, I have no photos. I wanted to put some photos from how students understand what is digital humanities, and we try to then to make a course all together using their understanding of different humanities. It was very interesting experience with group of 10 master students specialized in digital humanities, and I described this experience in some articles. It's really interesting, but this type doesn't work in usual groups of bachelor students in history, for example. And project, there are photos. Sorry, it's very bright sun. You can't see very interesting pictures, how they wrote digital humanities, how they draw digital humanities. And I will skip this theoretical part and show you these slides. This project is unfortunately also now only in Russian, but we have very big problem in Russia with digital humanities. We have now we don't have special literature in Russian on digital humanities. We have only one reader book, but of course we have some materials in different websites, and also some of these materials were produced by the NIU and HEC groups, but there are not any student book, any teach book of digital humanities. And of course it's rather difficult to make the only course which will be good for everybody. So we tried what we do here. We divided digital humanities to some parts. For example, texts, maps, nets, and digital art and other directions. And we try to sometimes translate, sometimes collect materials, sometimes we do it ourselves, teach instructions, different scientific articles, different tools for each of these directions. We collect it together and everybody can use it. What we can do in next step, we want to provide tool to construct the whole course of digital humanities for teachers and for students, and it, as we see it, it will be something like Lego bricks, and you can put your own course of digital humanities from different bricks and different levels. So I think that's all, and
yes, and the best time to ask questions, or maybe to make remarks, positive remarks, or maybe skeptical remarks, if you like, but short ones.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dinara, for this presentation. I have one question about this very interesting project on current newspapers. Was your collection incorporated into national state library, simply just the online collection of newspapers?
No. It was project which we do together with our region museum.
Yes, I see on the website.
Yes, and we started to work with this museum and the newspapers, I think 15 years ago, and interest of museums that these newspapers are in very bad physical condition. So firstly we digitized it ourselves in our laboratory, then started and then give these electronic collections to museum, and they were happy with these electronic collections.
But not the whole bunch of researchers, because
yes.
it would be very useful if this visibility
yes, of course.
became Russian.
Yeah, I understand your question. Yes, of course. No, we do not contact with this library, but we had contact with National Russian Corpus to put some of our newspapers to this corpus.
And they are inside. Yes.
I think not now, but I'm not sure because yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
Thank you.
No further questions? Charlotte, no questions? Well, if there is no question, then we should continue our discussion in our canteen. And I heard that it's the best time because there must be not so many students as usual, just in this several minutes we have at our disposal. And then we shall return up here.
Yeah. To room 204, which was planned initially in 3:10, in 15:10.
Yes. You should take also all your things with you.
Yeah, yes, take your stuff.
It's also comfortable to have all things in the canteen.
Are there many things?
Do you have many things with you?
We can leave something in 204, but I think always we have too many things.
Okay. I'm afraid that I personally have to disappear, but I'll be back.
And in the canteen there are tables organized especially for us. So we have to go online, buy some membership, go to these tables. They are to the right of the entrance, near the.
Или можно написать, да, меня зовут Дань, в порядке.
We can go over here.
Спасибо большое.
First floor, second floor.
Second.
It's on the 204.
Франк мне подарил книжку, или он